capacity of the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to create a funeral from a christening. I wish, ma'am, before I get into what it is I have to say, to just address some of his concerns, because based on recent trends, I need to try to answer his concerns quickly while he's in a position to benefit from hearing them. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first issue that was raised by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition was the issue of location. Why there? Why in such close proximity to the airport? I don't know if the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has confined his movements in Christchurch to Christchurch South, but obviously he does not get up as far as Coverley. Where the facility is to be located, Madam Deputy Speaker, while you can see the airport, you can't properly hear the airport. The noise coming from the airport blows to the east. That is to the north of the airport. The noise of planes taking off and landing, if you focus yourself entirely, you may possibly hear it. But it is not something that is likely to disturb residents, even residents at their most delicate. So I urge the Honourable Leader to just pop up there. If he wishes for me to send somebody to meet him to show him where it is, I can have that done. I know he won't come with me, so I wouldn't even waste my breath on that one. But we can perhaps have somebody show him, give him a tour, show him the exact location, what the facility is supposed to look like, where the hospice is going to be, as opposed to where the residential housing is going to be. And they can even show him, Madam Deputy Speaker, the area that is reserved by the hospice for some small agriculture on the scale that can make the hospice possibly self-sufficient in crops, in vegetables, in supplies like that. So that answers the second of his questions, as in why there and not in town. In town, the ability to actually have some sort of fresh crops, herbs, some ground provisions will not actually exist. The Honourable Leader has fixated on that plot of land out by Gemmett's Lane. He's fixated on it to the point where he has to raise it almost every time he speaks, whether or not it has anything whatsoever to do with the discussion at hand or whether it contributes in any way. We heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, about his vision for a 3-story modern facility there that would have, to be honest, at that point in time I was tuning out, but it would have a floor for palliative care, a floor for something else, and then at the bottom, a new and improved A&E department. I don't know, sir, who, if they had a choice, would put a center for palliative care above an A&E department. But you know, this was his vision, and we're all entitled to have our visions, as misguided as they can be. But sometimes you have to read the room. You have to look around. As the Honourable Member for Christchurch, for St. George South was speaking, the persons here who represent Baka were nodding their appreciation, nodding their agreement, nodding his understanding of the factors that influence A, the site, and B, the development, the potential development there. And I wish to acknowledge them, because it is important that those who are affected and those who have a vested interest be here to hear the debate, to hear what is being said, to lend their support, to understand the parameters within which government operates and what is being done in their name and in their interests. And I wish that at some point in time, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition had perhaps cast his eyes to the left to look at the persons who are interested in this facility, to look at the persons on whose behalf we're moving this resolution today, and understand that they were lost when he was speaking. Now, I don't wish to deter him from his vision, his utopic construction, his utopia erection in Jamet's Lane, that's entirely in his mind. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we move the hospice facility from there, then he now has another floor to find something else to put in it. He could probably put a licensing authority or something, maybe a psychiatric ward, something else that, that might pique and strike an interest. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition also said that he hopes that the government will not leave Baka to its own devices in funding, and hopes that they will get some assistance from the government. Obviously, ma'am, he did not listen to the presentation by the Honourable Member for St. George South. The Honourable Member for St. George South said the intention was to lease them the land, but the funding will be dependent on donors, dependent on the private sector. The government will play its part via subventions to fund the building and to fund the operation of the center. Now, the Honourable Leader came right after the Honourable Member for St. George South. So I cannot believe that he did not hear what was said. Maybe he wasn't listening, at which point that points to the danger of trying to debate something while actually not listening to the person who spoke, because you're not debating, you're not responding. You came with an agenda and determined, come hell or high water, to subject us to your vitriol. And ma'am, unfortunately I'm saying your because I have to address through you, but I don't mean your vitriol, obviously, ma'am. To subject us to vitriol and ramblings as opposed to touching on the goodness of this resolution. The Honourable Member also said that in his vision, the hospice would be located in an ultra-modern complex. His 3-story, 4-story erection. The hospice will be located within the ultra-modern complex. Madam Deputy Speaker, the hospice is being purpose-built. It is being purpose-built. The land is going to be given, the facility is going to be given. What is there is going to be demolished, and the hospice will get the chance to construct its facility according to the best practices, the best designs, to make it suit for their purpose with their direct intervention. That is the perfect place, madam, for the hospice. Now, we were given a tutorial on leasehold versus freehold and peppercorn rents and whatnot. I wish from the bottom of my heart just to educate the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The intention is to rent this facility to the Baka at the cost of $1,000 a year. $1,000 a year. That is as peppercorn can be. I not versed in accounting, but $1,000 per year, that's 1,000 divided by 12, that is under $90 a month. It doesn't get more peppercorn than that. So yes, the government is doing its part. We have to charge something to make the transaction legitimately a lease. At $90 a month, you can't even rent a room in the same Martindale's Road for $90 a month. Now, I sometimes feel sorry for him, because his nature appears to be such that he cannot even contemplate a win-win situation. The thought, Madam Deputy Speaker, that parties can actually agree on what is best, agree on the arrangement, agree on the construction, agree on the concept, and both sides be happy, is beyond the contemplation of the Leader of the Opposition. Maybe that's why he's there and not here. I had the opportunity, Madam Deputy, to meet with the representatives of Baka because this is my constituency. The constructions of my constituency, the benefits are going to be my constituency. I wanted to know what it was all about. I wanted to understand the concept. I wanted to be able, when I came here, to speak and represent the interests of all, not with any hope of favor, right? But to give everybody an understanding and a fair hearing. Now, I had a most difficult conversation this weekend. It's my father. My father wanted to see me. I went to visit him. And I was expecting, I don't know, those father-son conversations. Love your dad, love your son. That sort of thing. My father wanted to discuss undertakers. He did not want to leave anything to the future. Not that he, to either of our knowledge, he's in imminent danger of dying, but because he thought it was time that we actually had the uncomfortable conversation. That it makes no sense to dodge the inevitable, that it is best that we put our cards on the table and understand what everybody is about. So we sat down and we had that conversation about funeral homes, about undertakers, about arrangements in the event that anybody passes in our family. And I say that to couch the fact that sometimes we have to accept what is inevitable and make the preparations for it. Madam Deputy, what's the difference between a hospice and palliative care? Palliative care, as I understand it, is the care that is given to assist persons who are suffering, who may be suffering from a terminal illness. Hospice care is a part of palliative care, but it is that care that you give to someone who is terminal, where death is pretty much inevitable. I think you're looking at a target of about 6 months. When the person is expected, all things being equal, to pass within 6 months, I think that is hospice care. The question was raised as to why is the facility initially so small? Because a lot of people go to the hospital and they're unable to be admitted because there's no capacity. Why are we aiming at such a small number of persons who might be residents of the facility? And I raise this in our discussion, which is why it's important to have these discussions. And the intention is that this facility really caters for those who are very close to end of life, where death is imminent and immediately foreseeable. That those persons don't have to suffer at home. That the families don't have to be distressed by the fact that they're unable to care for their loved ones in the way that they actually want to. So you are going to naturally get a high turnover because your time in this facility is expected to be short. Chances are, if the model works, we may have others. There may be further development. But for now, we're starting with a small facility. Ma'am, it's interesting how life works. I had this meeting, I think maybe about 3 weeks ago, with Baka. And since I've had that meeting, I've had somebody that I know very well suffer and die at home. And I was talking through the process. I was trying to be supportive of the family, and I was getting a day by day, maybe twice a day updates as to what was going on, that Granny's eyes were turning yellow, that Granny had stopped eating, that these things, and Granny was in pain. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what would have assisted that person. They did not have to be suffering at home with the family feeling powerless to help them. Somebody called me on Saturday, just past Saturday. Their mother had taken a turn for the worse. The mother was at A&E at the hospital. She is terminal. The doctor said there's nothing more we can do for her. You need to take her home. And I know this lady. She's one of my constituents. A dear old, she is like this salt of the earth, a good woman. And her daughter was crying to me on the phone saying, please, can you get the hospital to take her in? Because we just cannot manage anymore. We just cannot manage. And the hospital did not have the room. It didn't have the room. So she went home. Now, is it fair for us to put persons in this situation? When you are taking home somebody who's terminally ill, who's suffering from cancer, and that person is in pain, the doctor may prescribe a drug, morphine or something, a narcotic. And you have to administer that as indicated by the doctor. You are not a trained person. You don't know if mommy is crying and crying, if to give her a little bit more. You always wonder, did I do the best for them in their last moments? A facility such as this takes that pressure off of the family and allows the person to be surrounded by caregivers who can provide the exact support that is needed. People can be comfortable that mommy, my mother, my father, my aunt, my sister, my child has gotten the best care possible to ease their transition from this life into the next. It exists, palliative care exists in some form or fashion in Barbados. It's very expensive. It's very expensive. A lot of people can't afford it. I think the model here is that those who can afford will pay. Insurance would cover some. You can sign over the pension, at which point this brings me to another. I'm sorry that I could not speak and allow the most senior legal mind in here to benefit from what I'm about to say, but maybe he will say on the news. We have in Barbados a facility under the Mental Health Act, receivership under the Mental Health Act, where, quite frankly, people think, you know, get a power of attorney. My mother is getting ill, get a power of attorney, and we can use her bank account to deal with her and whatever. But what people don't realize is that from the time you're unable to revoke a power of attorney, that power of attorney is supposed to die. The efficacy of that power of attorney is supposed to only be valid insofar as the person who gives it is capable of revoking it. So when mommy is suffering from dementia, or they may be at end of life and unable to make proper decisions for themselves, that power of attorney is of no more effect. We can apply to the court under the Mental Health Act for receivership, but that is a process. So I am envisioning that when we start to get into the accepted area of hospice care, then we're actually going to have to relook the legislation or laws as it deals with certain things like that to make it easier if somebody is terminally ill. I'll just wait until the distraction removes itself. Yes, ma'am. I envision that we'd have to relook the legislation that deals with things like palliative care and hospice care, that deals with how we access and how we operate on behalf of somebody who may not be in a position to make decisions for themselves. But we've started the process. We've opened the door. We know where it is that we want to get to. And now, in addition to granting the land, we need to relook all applicable legislation to make sure that the concept is capable of being properly realized legislatively, practically, administratively, to give the best effect for what it is that we're doing. Madam Deputy, this takes me to another point. I think we as well need to relook the certification of death and the pronouncement of death in Barbados. It is a difficult thing for family it's a difficult thing for families who have lost a loved one to have to sit down with the loved one dead at home, awaiting the arrival of a particular doctor or doctors. It is a traumatic experience for them. I cast my mind to a particular situation where somebody woke up and found a relative dead in the vehicle outside the house. The engine was still on, and the person was dead in the car. Apparently they came home and they had a heart attack before they could get out of the vehicle. That person found them at 5 o'clock in the morning. They called me at 9 o'clock in the morning to say to me that nobody had come yet. They called the police, and the police said, you can turn off the car, but don't trouble the body. At 1 o'clock, they called me. You know by this time what was happening. Somebody came about 3 in the afternoon, and that's after I intervened. Said, do you know what you're doing to these people? But this is because only certain persons, I think maybe 2 or 3, only certain persons in Barbados can actually pronounce death. Madam Deputy, we need to look at that. That is perhaps the hardest thing for a family member, to sit down and look at a body. You can't touch it. You can't open the window. You can't do anything. You have to watch nature and temperature and climate take its toll on that person that you loved. Because we can't get somebody to write on a piece of paper what we all can see has happened, that the person has died. I don't know. I did first aid. Madam Deputy, I was told you check for pulse. If in doubt, you put a mirror underneath the nostril to see if there's any fog from the breath. I did first aid a long time ago, but there are ways, Madam Deputy, that even the uninitiated can tell this person has passed. Any doctor in Barbados, I dare say, can determine whether somebody is alive or they're dead. There are multiple doctors in Barbados, plenty. If we need to agree and designate more, let's designate more. If we need to put structures around what happens after, let's put the structures around what happens after. But this policy, this practice we have, that only 1 or 2 or 3 people can pronounce death, has to stop. It is torture. It is torture for family members. I wasn't planning to go here, but you know what? We're having a discussion about death. We're having a discussion about easing the transition. We're having a discussion about easing the transition for the affected person, for the terminally ill person. Let's talk about easing the transition for the family members as well. Madam Deputy, as an MP, we are exposed to death more often than most people. There are people who support you, and if their family members are sick, they want you to know. And you have to give them the support. I have honestly seen more death than I wish to see. I've seen more death than I wish to see. And we must never underestimate our role in the lives of ordinary Barbadians. What does being an MP mean to somebody? It means you're there to celebrate when the child is born. It means you're there to help them with a house. It means you're there when somebody dies. And just to lighten it ever so slightly in the most morbid way, I remember once, Madam Deputy, I got a phone call from a strong supporter, and he was almost inconsolable on the phone. He got home, and his mother had collapsed, and she was going through spasming and in distress. And he said, MP, because he never calls me anything other than MP, MP, she's gone, mommy's gone, mommy's gone. And I said to him, have you called the ambulance Mommy's gone, mommy's... Have you called the ambulance? He had not called the ambulance. He said, no, I did not call the ambulance, I'm calling you. So I called the ambulance. And I called a doctor who was close by. And they managed to get there, and mommy was actually not gone. They attended to mommy, and mommy is still with us. That is what we do as MPs. That's the way that we are seeing in the lives of some people. That's the care we're expected to exert the whole way down the line. So, quite frankly, I would love to be able to see some of our most vulnerable at the transition point in their life have the dignity that they should have. Have the dignity where somebody can take care of you, facilitate your family coming to visit you, but also know that you're getting the best care without actually pulling the rest of your family down with you. Families in Barbados, you have two sides. You have the people who want to drop off the old people at the hospital and leave them there. And then you have the other side who cannot accept that sometimes the best thing to do is actually to turn your distressed family member over to professionals who can care for them in a way that you can't. Some of us feel that we are abandoning our family if we put them in a care facility. Some of us feel we're abandoning our family if we're not there for them. But to be honest, I can't think of any mother who would want to see their child suffer in the way that they're suffering at their passing. So I sum this all up to say, this is a good thing. I have dwelt a lot on the hospice aspect because the reality, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the housing speaks for itself. I'm glad for the 33 housing solutions in Christchurch. I'm very glad for it. I'm familiar with the piece of land. That land was derelict for a long time. It used to be a hive of activity. They used to host weddings and things out there. Nothing has been done with it. The pool had been collecting water and harboring mosquitoes. The thing was overgrown, so it was causing rodent issues for the other people in Corvallis. So I am glad that we are actually now doing something with that. It makes me, I don't care if it used to be agricultural land or if it's agricultural land, right? It was not being farmed. So agricultural land that is not under cultivation and nobody wants to cultivate it is of no use to keep calling it agricultural land. And I asked the Honourable Minister of Agriculture as well, like, I mean, how big an issue is this? He said, there are 28,000 acres of agricultural land in Barbados. More than we can actually farm. He then made the point to me that modern farming requires a lot less land than old-time farming. We do hydroponics, we do vertical farming, we do other things. The Honourable Leader of Opposition keeps getting stuck on this point that we're fertilizing the soil with cement. We have to balance competing interests. The reality is we have a shortage of housing in Barbados. We have to provide houses for people to live. We have to provide reasonable solutions that the most vulnerable and those in a certain bracket can actually have the chance to own a piece of the rock. We have to balance that with the needs for agriculture. And my friend said there is more than enough agricultural land left in Barbados to serve our purposes. We do not have the luxury of being myopic, narrow-minded, and effectively being a one-trick pony like others in here. We have to manage for everybody in Barbados. So, in summary, my eyes have been opened. I had never thought fully about hospice care, I'll be honest. Never thought fully about hospice care. But it is amazing that since I've had that discussion and all my questions were answered, that in the short time since then I've seen practical examples of persons who could have used hospice care to ease the transition, who could use it now to save everybody from being distressed and even the terminally ill from feeling guilty as to what the rest of the family is going through in their name. And as I said, with respect to the units, the residential units, it's a no-brainer. So, taking all that into consideration, I'm glad that BACA took its time to come and explain to me what it was all about. I'm glad that they're using their own initiative to source funding for the development of a purpose-built center and for the development of programs geared at easing the transition and providing care for those at the last stage of their life. I honestly could not see that there could be any objection to this. But as I said, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition never, ever ceases to amaze me. But let us not turn a christening into a funeral. I support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to support this resolution. The Honourable Member for St. George South for the presentation. It is a cognate debate, obviously primarily because the land that we are leasing to Baka is also the subject of a larger parcel of land for which we are seeking to vest the entire parcel of land in the National Housing Corporation for the purpose of housing development. I too, like my colleague from Christchurch East, was a little baffled by the Leader of the Opposition, Honourable Member for Christchurch South's presentation, because I was a bit concerned that I wasn't sure if he was actually supporting the resolution at one point, or whether the focus was more on, as he put it, the location of the facility for the palliative care facility. And as he continued to talk about housing development, it then became clear that there is such a divide, certainly between this administration and certainly the Democratic Labour Party administration, as it relates to the approach to not only housing development, but development of the country as a whole. As it relates to housing development, it is clear that the member for Christchurch South appears to be stuck in a colonial past, where the focus for him seems only to be on one entity, a single entity created by government, being responsible for the development and the build-out of housing. It is clear that he has not collided with the productive ways in which other countries globally have been able to address housing, whether through the joint venture relationships or whether creating other entities to be able to better manage the housing stock and certainly the products in terms of what people are able to afford, whether to rent or whether to be able to obtain a mortgage in order to be able to have proper accommodation. And it's clear that that divide is what the Honourable Member perhaps needed to be reminded of in relation to the history of his own administration, because I certainly sat in this place at a time when there were several housing projects that were alluded to by the then administration, which never saw the light of day in some cases, or in some cases, when we came to office in 2018, we were burdened with that responsibility of being able to complete a number of those housing projects. What we are on all fours with the then administration on is that housing is a priority. But our approach as a government has been one where we have been able to find different models, and particularly being able to use renewable energy sources to be able to lower the costs for, in particular, low-income persons to be able to have housing accommodation that does not cost an arm and a leg. It goes back from a basic principle of being able to ensure that everybody is able to own a little piece of this beautiful rock, that Barbadians can aspire, the young boys and girls of this country, to be able to own their own home, to own their own piece of land someday, and to be able to build out for themselves and certainly for their families, something which they are proud of being able to call their own. So as I said, it is clear that we are divided on these things, and that instead of the Leader of the Opposition supporting the bill in its entirety, he had to take the opportunity to throw a couple pot shots. But I will throw a couple back, Madam Deputy Speaker, because as I said, I recall what we have had to do in relation to the housing program. I remember sitting in the opposition on that side, right behind you, Honourable Member for St. James North, and hearing about the constant project in St. George, which we came to office and we had to spend, I think, significant sums to be able to complete over 60 houses that had been left by the then administration. Madam Deputy Speaker, you would also recall the parish land projects, where we've been able to put a few people in the houses, but it came at a substantial investment by this administration to be able to do repairs, renovations, retrofits, in some places take down the entire existing structure and have to rebuild the structure to be able to allow ordinary Barbadians to own a piece of the rock. I remember the days of hearing about Pickering projects down in St. Lucie, where they were going to develop all types of housing for low-income families, which never materialized. And I can go on and on about the promises that have been made by the last administration regarding the development of housing. Now, I take housing very serious. Perhaps the only thing that the Leader of the Opposition and I may agree on in terms of what he presented is that I do feel that there's a very causal link between the type of accommodation people live in, very overcrowded conditions, and the link to crime. And whenever I stand in this place, I speak to the issue of easing the densely populated nature of communities, because the community I represent in particular, but also the ones that I see as I drive across the length and breadth of this country, there are people who are living in very cramped conditions. And not that people have not come from cramped conditions and succeeded, but there are some people, because of the conditions in which they live, compounded by other social factors, tend to find themselves reverting to a life of crime because of the circumstances in which they find themselves. And therefore, I can only support any resolution that is brought to this chamber that perhaps gives a further opportunity for people to aspire to the goal of home ownership, but also where we are seeking to be able to include persons in the process of home ownership so that we can build out future generations of homeowners. Now, I know the Coverley project and the Coverley name, perhaps, I remember being on that side as well at the time, lent itself to a lot of discourse. I remember the Honourable Member for St. James Central, when the housing project was first being built out, the concerns regarding that the then administration said that the project was for low-income persons. But I am not aware that the project that I see today is in any way a low-income people project. And I want to remind the Honourable Member of that time, because I certainly, as part of this administration, I am very focused that we must build for persons who are most vulnerable, that in some cases we must subsidize low-income housing, and that we must not use housing as a political football to enrich the coffers of some, while others in our society continue to suffer as a result of not having proper accommodation for them and their families. So I have no difficulty with the acquisition as being presented by the Honourable Member for St. George South. The intention to be able to have 33 new homeowners in this country, I think, is a wise one. I don't get the impression it is low-income housing, but I do know that the government's entire program is intended to carve out a number of different types of programs that would facilitate for us being able to house as many people as we possibly can. And I think it's just for that reason that I support what the Honourable Member is seeking to do here. Certainly in the Lower Bernice area, which is directly impacting my own constituency, the Honourable Member, I know when he's closing, will probably also update, but I continue to remain in contact with him on a regular basis, because the Lower Bernie project under this administration was intended to take 20 acres out of 40 acres of the housing stock, which was acquired by way of a private arrangement with a landowner through planning gains, to be able to allow the constituency, certainly of St. Michael's Southeast and the surrounding areas, to benefit from a project that would ease the dense nature of, in particular, the areas of Golden Rock in the Pinelands community. And I'm grateful that we have not only made the pronouncement, but we have worked as an administration year after year to try to get the designs completed, to be able to ensure that we can now get to the stage where we can put in the roads. I'm grateful to the Ministry of Housing as well for engaging in a social survey of within the constituency to be able to identify the greatest needs, because we have a lot of people have been in the community of St. Michael's Southeast who are on a waiting list for housing, but we have to obviously, as we have done as a government since coming to office, ensure that we are able to prioritize the persons with the greatest needs within our society. So I look forward to that project. I'm told that the road should be going in rather shortly, that now that the social surveys are completed and they have the assessments of the number of persons requiring housing, that they are now at the stage where they can start to complete their designs. And I believe before the end of this year, the designs are finished. And sorry, my apologies, the designs are finished. So they are moving quickly. And that by the end of this year, we should start to see the beginning of construction of that project in the Lower Bernice area. As it relates to the other resolution, Madam Deputy Speaker, which relates to the Barbados Association for Cancer Advocacy being able to lease the property, which was the old plantation house in the Coverley area, I too support this resolution, and I do so perhaps more of a personal standpoint than I believe anybody else in this space may be able to speak to. When you have faced a diagnosis of cancer, when you face anything which is life-threatening, I believe that you have a different perspective on not just life, but you have a different perspective on death as well. And in 2018, when I would have made it clear to the country and certainly to the rest of the world, my own diagnosis at the time, it made me certainly reflect not on just what I had to do in the months which followed, but certainly in relation to my own mortality as well. It is a place that when you find yourself in that situation, having to think about those things in terms of the future, I tell people that I live my life completely different than I have ever lived before, and certainly I think I live my life and my perspective on life is completely different than certainly maybe some of my colleagues as well, because unless you've walked that road, you've walked that journey, you do not see life in the same way. So today I'm very proud of BACA for this step. This was a manifesto promised by the Barbados Labour Party. We recognize when we were coming to office from a number of our rubbing shoulders, but also from our engagement with the public, that this was a need to be able to provide not only hospice facilities, but also palliative care facilities as a part of what we consider to be the human rights of Barbadians. It is something that is widely accepted globally. People have options in terms of from cradle to grave, and I think that perhaps it has been too long in coming in the Barbadian healthcare landscape to be able to see something of this nature on the horizon for the benefit of not just Barbadians who have money, but Barbadians who certainly do not have money, and to have a place where people and their families can certainly be able to go during the last days of life. So I believe that this is the fulfillment of not only the vision in terms of what we would have wanted to see, but with the help of the private sector, and certainly persons who, even within the organization, they're not persons who have no nexus to cancer, but they are persons who themselves have also been through and walked the road as well, and I think they too understand the concerns of families. I have had I wouldn't want to say it's the opportunity, but I've had perhaps a distinct honor in many cases of being the person that people often call, just as my colleague for Christchurch East has said, as a politician, you play a different role than most other people do. You're often that person that people call when they get a diagnosis that is going to lead to them dying. I'm often speaking about people who reach the stage 4 of cancer, for instance. And it is painful to watch the deterioration of people's conditions when they are at that late stage of their diagnosis. It is equally difficult to see the challenges that people face as it relates to the financial implications of that stage as well, of their life, exiting their life and into death as well. Because if you have to be sent home from the hospital, oftentimes, depending on your social status, the challenge comes that the house has to be retrofitted. Particularly if you were living upstairs, you have to come downstairs. Sometimes the bathrooms are not downstairs on one level, so sometimes people have to have the resources and the ability to be able to retrofit their spaces to make it accommodating for their loved ones. And then comes the price of the oxygen tanks. It comes the cost of the Pampers, the adult Pampers that are required, the blue bed sheets that sometimes you have to use as well because it becomes difficult in the later stages to be able to turn people. You also have the cost of the hospital beds, the mechanized beds that are almost 2,000 US. And if you purchase them overseas, they may be a little bit less. But these are the realities of families having to grapple with the news that a loved one is at those late stages. Obviously, the hospital tries its best at times to be able to allow people to remain in the institution. But there too, and I suspect the Honourable Minister will also speak to it in terms of the challenges that the hospital has, where because families cannot cope, they often turn their backs on their loved ones. And you have a lot of people in the hospital who are not waiting for an operation necessarily, but they're taking up a bed because there is no place for them to go. The fact that this particular lease lends itself to a facility that at least will start with 14 people to be able to allow for families and loved ones to be able to be in a space to be cared for by health professionals, I think is certainly a welcome step in our healthcare system. I am a firm believer that while it starts at 14, I think the private sector, I'm sure once you make that step, oftentimes the private sector will come on board to assist. I have found too in my interaction with people overseas that love Barbados, people who have been in the healthcare profession, that once we reach out to people in the diaspora, that there is a sense of love for this country and for the build out and development of this country, where I can certainly see that a facility such as this should be able in the external markets to be able to speak to that diaspora and to the people that have made Barbados their home to assist in the build out of this facility. I don't think we need to stop at the 14. I think the potential is there to do more. And this administration, by way of this particular lease, has not only granted this house and this property to Baka, but there are other lands on the property that will allow for the future build out and the development. So I think this is just the beginning. The Leader of the Opposition would have questioned the location, and again, I suspect that that is perhaps more mischievous than anything, because I think we also recognize that a facility such as this also has to earn. It cannot be dependent on the government of Barbados for a subsidy. It cannot be cap in hand to the private sector all the time. And its location actually near the airport is actually quite a blessing, because it allows for it to do two things. One, be able to earn foreign exchange, no doubt, from people who may have to fly in to have medical care and attention at our facilities, but then may need a place to be able to house their loved ones because they may not be able to travel back to their country of origin. That in turn allows for the facility to be able to earn a revenue, while at the same time being able, as we do already in relation to our geriatric facilities, being able to allow ordinary Barbadians who may be able to afford it to be able to pay perhaps a nominal amount to be able to house their loved ones there in their latter years of life. And equally, as we do, we subsidize people who can't afford it at all, because that is the nature of the government that we have, where we subsidize people in the geriatric hospitals, in the nursing care facilities, to be able to allow persons to be cared for and to be looked after in their older years. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, you're well aware that our population is aging, and these are real issues, these are burning issues that are affecting ordinary Barbadians. I am a firm believer too that community care, and I said it in the estimates and I will continue to repeat it, that we need to integrate into the landscape of healthcare treatment the opportunity for people in communities who are trained and who are interested in looking after the elderly to be able to allow elderly people to remain in place as well. There are different tiers that we must continue to focus on. Palliative care is but one. But I believe that we have a responsibility, particularly in our densely populated communities, to be able to find ways to transition and to transform locations, whether it's housing or old buildings, to be able to allow for people in communities to be able to retrofit spaces. I have several people in St. Michael Southeast, Madam Deputy Speaker, who don't have these types of healthcare facilities, but they have opened up their homes to elderly persons. There are people who will drop off an elderly mother or an elderly grandmother for someone to be able to look after them. All they need is to be able to have the assistance, to be a structure to be put in place to allow them to be able to put a ramp to get into their houses. They may need the assistance with the safety bars to be able to, if the persons need to take a shower, to make sure that the shower meets the conditions and the standards for the elderly person to be to have a bath and to be cared for. There are simple things that we can do as an interim measure while facilities such as this are built out. I think oftentimes we spend so much time focusing on the big picture things, but we fail to recognize that Barbadians across the island are already engaged in looking after people. Madam Deputy, you are perhaps one of the persons that I know that has cared for more people in certainly my political career than most. Whether family or people in the neighborhood, I am well familiar with the work that you have done caring for the elderly. And short of getting an award for it, I know that your blessings are going to be many whenever that time comes. And I know that many of us will make sure that we look after you as well. But the reality is that there's another side there are two other perspectives that I want to bring to this discussion this morning. And one is the perspective that we raise our children to get older and to leave home, to leave the nest, to be able to build their families and to get an opportunity in terms of a job. But we rarely discuss the issue of aging, and we rarely discuss the issue of getting sick and ill health and preparing for death. It is not something that we like to talk about, which is why the Honourable Member for Christchurch East can say that these discussions are things that he's now having perhaps with his father. But the reality is that all of us in this chamber, in some form or fashion, are facing these issues in relation to our own loved ones as well. So we get it. We relate very well, I think, in terms of our understanding of what the general population is facing, because we are dealing with it. I've been open about my mother being in a nursing home, and I look after my elderly father, who's at 84 years old. So we get it in terms of the challenges that the public faces, but we also recognize that we have a responsibility to allow people to breathe a little easier, because they may not all have the resources that everybody else has available to them as well. But there's an issue that we don't like to talk about as Barbadians, and it is being able to prepare for that stage. Some people will prepare by way of the funeral arrangements and determining the undertaker, but people don't often talk about making a will. They don't talk about being able to prepare themselves for, getting sick. You could be going along well, you get a stroke, at the end of the day, you don't have all of the cognitive functions, and therefore you're then not in a position to be able to go into a lawyer's office to be able to have something drafted. These are conversations that we need to have more, and it's not to bring a level of morbidity to the space, but it is really to get real about the realities now of what each of us are facing as we encounter the aging population in our communities and as we interface with people on a daily basis. Enough people are not taking into account how they transition. And what we find is oftentimes there is confusion in the families, not just in terms of who is going to pay the bill at the funeral home, but there's confusion in relation to the estate. Who is going, a couple people are living in a household, who is going to take responsibility? And I urge Barbadians to, again, seek out the advice, but equally, I think our lawyers need to step up and certainly be able to create the types of clinics that allow people to have the options presented to them as to what some of those options are. The Honourable Minister of Housing and Member for St. George South is well aware that, particularly in the housing areas, this is a perennial problem, whereby because of the lack of conveyances in some of the housing estates, people are not able to properly plan their future. And while they may have the name of a person who was living in the house, a son, a daughter, a neighbor who was living inside of the house, the reality is that when they die, and their name may be the only name on the documents at housing, sometimes the families struggle to be able to get the appropriate documentation, whether it's letters of administration in most cases, to be able to ensure that they can go forward. There is a cost for taking out letters of administration. Let us not fool ourselves. It is the correct legal mechanism for which, if you die without making a will, that you must go forward to the courts in order to be able to have the paperwork sorted so that your families can be clear in their mind who is going to own the property. But there is another reality that I feel government must look to, and perhaps in the Ministry of Housing, we need to devise a way to be able to assist families in clearing up these estate matters so that people, once that is out of the way, estates can be divided. People can decide who is going to get the house, who is going to move out of the house. Do they need to go and borrow money in order to be able to retrofit the house so everybody can live comfortably? But I don't think that in a modern day Barbados that we can continue to ignore these issues, particularly in relation to the housing estates. It is causing endless confusion. It is causing endless tensions. And we are finding people having to, you know, again, we wonder why people are squatting, why people are taking up Crown state lands, and these are the reasons. But we as a government have to find the mechanisms to be able to make it a bit simpler for people, not just while they are living, to be able to address these issues, but also to make the process simplified when persons actually die and the families have now to come together to be able to sort out the estate matters. So I know that the Honourable Member for St. George South always listens to me, and I know that he will follow suit in terms of addressing these issues, and I know he knows that I'm going to remind him that the title deeds and the issues in relation to the housing estates must continue to be a priority, because again, this creates an unnecessary confusion and tension in already densely populated communities. The other issue, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I would wish to speak to briefly as well, is that while we speak about the nearing of death, the transition to death in relation to palliative care, we also need to talk about the life that we are living as well. And I say that in the context of the healthcare system, because it is important that while we are talking about what happens when you're on your way out, that you are also, as not only government, but the healthcare systems and all of us in this space, being able to speak about the things that are important or should be important to people while they are living. The statistics that we hear, the 86-point-something% of persons who will die from chronic non-communicable diseases, must be a problem to each and every one of us. It cannot just be a statistic that is somewhere floating around in the atmosphere that we are proud in spouting when we get up to speak to talk about chronic non-communicable diseases. We are seeing people who are struggling with their health. We are seeing the burden that is plaguing our healthcare system as a result of people not being able to cope. We all accept that we have come from a slave and a colonial society where sugar has been the order of the day. We accept that the practices that happened during that period, some of them have hung over to this period, and that people continue to eat badly and to drink badly. And I don't look at you, Honourable Member for St. James, nor for any other reason than that to say that you are one that has listened, because during the by-election you made sure you put down the water. You took up the water and you put down the soft drinks, right? And I feel very strongly that our message must be one that while we talk about palliative care, we have to talk about the practices, the way people live presently. Because if we are not talking prevention, then we're going to continue to talk about the statistics of the people who are going to die from chronic non-communicable diseases. I would like us as a country to get to the point where we talk about how many people we saved. Not how many people are on the waiting list at the hospital. Not how many people are going to die in a year from a particular disease. But let us talk more about the efforts that are being made, whether it is in relation to the National Nutrition Policy, whether it is gradually stamping out the amount of sugar content and added sugars that our people are using that have become so acceptable that people feel that it is the lifeline that they hold on to. Let us start to talk about it from the agricultural perspective, encouraging people to grow more of what they eat and to eat what they grow, and not just simply use it as catchy taglines, but each of us have a responsibility as leaders to also live what we are saying to the population. You can't just tell people you must eat this and you must eat that, but we are not making the things either affordable or we're not making the things accessible to people to be able to help them make those decisions. So I would like to see more of the programs which not just tell you to eat healthy, but tell you how on a limited budget you should be, what are the things that you should be spending on a limited budget. Many of us give people a voucher, sometimes to help them ease their living conditions. We give them a voucher for $150 sometimes, $200, $100, whatever it is. How many people stop to ask, what are you buying with this? What are you buying with this? And equally, what can this buy? Because if it can only buy the things that are sugary, the snacks that are the wrong snacks for to be consumed by our young people, then all we are doing is becoming a part of the problem, because we are helping to facilitate the purchase of the things that our people should not be eating. So I can tell you straight, I don't give unless I have the conversation. Every child that I interact with in my constituency knows that if Auntie Santia gives you money to buy something, a snack, I ask you which snack you're going to buy. And it starts there, till eventually the children know they're either gonna sit and going, sometimes for a granola bar, they're going for a pack of nuts, they're going for fruits or something which they know is healthy. It is not to say that we start to eliminate all things that are bad for you, but people have to start somewhere to be able to minimize the challenges that are likely to come from making bad decisions. So I don't want a discussion as today to be revolving around the journey to death without a discussion on the journey of life and the importance of making sure that we do the things now to make sure that people take control of their health. Now that brings me to my final concern, which is that when we talk about this issue of life and the journey of life, I have been advocating for a linear accelerator for cancer patients in this country for the last year. I have done so because I, more than I think, again, anybody else in this room and elsewhere, has had to listen to the people calling me early on a morning, late at night, and saying, DPM, we can't get to use either the current cobalt machine, or we cannot get the assistance to be able to get out of Barbados to be able to get the radiation done outside. We have an old cobalt machine, which I think everybody has agreed it has served its purpose, and we needed to move to a linear accelerator. We have been able to purchase the accelerator. But my concern still remains, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are several people day by day that are being diagnosed with cancer and other ailments that require you to have radiation. And we have not yet been able to have the benefit of the linear accelerator installed at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. I am sure when the Honourable Minister speaks, because he and I have spoken about this before, and I've told him I don't surprise anybody in this house. I let him know what I'm going to say. But I have an obligation, regardless of the position that I hold, to the people that have died, to the people that are still awaiting treatment in this country at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, the people who are still waiting to be able to access health care out of this country, to be able to ask the questions in this place, and to be able to have those answers given to those people. Because they are on a journey of life, and if we are not careful, they will be on their journey to death before they get to at least enjoy a few moments, a few more months, a few more weeks of life before they have to take advantage of a palliative care facility. So I ask it in that context, Madam Deputy Speaker, out of concern for us making sure that not only do we purchase the equipment, but that we install and we get operational any equipment. It could be the linear accelerator, it could be anything else that we are purchasing to improve healthcare. Because our record as a government is clear that we have spent more in this country improving the operations of healthcare. We still have a long way to go in terms of the delivery, because having the services is one thing. But I will stand here in this place and anywhere and tell you that based on the complaints, we still have a responsibility to the people of this country to reduce the waiting times, to reduce the times that people wait for surgeries, because that continues to be a bugbear for Barbadians who have no choice but to use the system. I've had people call me recently who were diagnosed with cancer, who have to go to the hospital, and they're concerned that, you know, the length of time it takes for the chemotherapy to be administered takes a long time. So when I speak of the journey of life, I speak of it from a perspective that these are the realities that we are facing, and that every day that we take longer to be able to make sure that equipment is functional, that we correct the procedures within the hospitals and the polyclinics, is a day that people lose of their life. I am fortunate and I could bless, I thank God every single day, because he is the giver of life, for being able to give me the opportunity. I do not know how long I have, but what I know is that my perspective is different from most because of the journey I have walked. And I understand how important it is to be able to preserve life. And I therefore, as I said, I speak on behalf of those who have died, who did not have access to the linear accelerator, to those who have not been able to get to the healthcare facilities outside of Barbados. I speak on behalf of the ones who have been recently diagnosed and are trying to figure out their way in this muddled system as to how it is that they're going to get the quality of care that they need to, because they may not be able to afford it. So I give food for thought, perhaps, to all who have ears, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this journey that we have been on as a government, that we never take the eye off the ball as to why we have come here. And we never forget the people who have sent us here and our responsibility to deliver to those persons. Many of these people do not have insurance. Many of these people will never have insurance, because once you are diagnosed with a number of these illnesses, your ability to get the insurance is also compromised. Let's be fair. So we are dealing with double whammies, because we have to make sure that we understand the urgency. I don't just grumble because I have nothing better to do with my time on this issue. I grumble and I agitate for this because it is near and it is dear to my heart, and it could happen to any one of us. It could happen to anybody that is close to us, that we love and we care for, or that we represent. Urgency must be the order of the day. And I therefore want to again commend the Honourable Minister on these two resolutions, and to say to you that I await the works that have been promised, and certainly the continued build-out of the housing sector in Barbados, and to the Minister of Health as well, to ensure that you are able to answer the questions appropriately and to give some comfort to the Barbadians out there who are trying to navigate the system. Again, I want to commend BACA and to encourage you as well to be a part with the healthcare facilities of being able to train people in how to deal with palliative care, because it doesn't have to just be in the facility, but it may also be that we're starting to engender the confidence in our elderly care programs, that people are actually specialized in this area, that they can go into homes, they can go into communities to be able to deliver on the palliative care and hospice care mandate of this administration. And with those few words, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am obliged.
Honourable Member Michael.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for allowing me to follow protocol. And I know that you always stick in a rigid way to the rules of the House, and you did not at this time even divert from those kind of standards that you normally promote and advocate. First of all, I speak firsthand on marginal issues that relate to the poor. And I say firsthand because I too, over 10 years ago, the doctor diagnosed me with cancer. And, yeah, you know, as usual, many people prayed for Pressy to die. Some even went to look for me in the hospital and wished me well, but they went home and prayed that I die. So I also know how people behave. And even when I was in the hospital, people were calling because I think some very popular figure at that specific moment in history, that person died, and they say that, and Pressy died the same day too. And I think you can remember well, when I came out of the hospital, and I was back on my feet, I made sure that I picked one of the best theme songs for that general election called Bury Alive, ma'am. So I believe that equally as legitimate in terms of speaking firsthand on my personal experience. And for quite a long time, I discovered that debates drift away from some of the challenges that people in poverty face, whether the challenges in health, economic matters, social matters. And although some of these people, every now and then, will babble some sentiment about their interests in the challenges of poor people, I listen, but I don't always believe, even when they speak with a tone of sincerity and commitment, I don't really believe them, because I also understand the dramaturgical approach to the politics of Barbados. But I think this is significant enough that anyone with a social conscience would be very concerned and would pay a salute to the ministry that has put this one on the table in these chambers. When I first saw the bill and I heard about Coverley, I said, oh my God. What is this about Coverley? Because I didn't even recognize that they had more land outside the massive housing project that was constructed at Coverley by one specific character in Barbados. And I was very concerned. Ma'am, I am responsible for social transformation and economic enfranchisement. So I was very concerned. Well, this is a greater effort now for the collective strengthening of the wealth of a specific type in the society. But I then read the document and recognized that this was a humane effort to do something for people who, in this society, sometimes are over the age, sometimes of 50. And this is a funny society too. There was a time when this government was talking a lot about intergenerational development. And then the word was relegated to the back burner. And then you start hearing youth. And then you start saying that the youth seem to be something wrong with the youth, and wondering if somebody cursed, if some divine power cursed the youth. Then you say that the youth is the alternative. So I know that there's lots of ambiguity in terms of seeking clear thought on the philosophical moorings that should be applied even when we're introducing social and economic legislation in this country. Well, this is a humane type. But I believe that in addition to what was highlighted in terms of a paradigm that we once put in place at West Terrace, where NHC took on the responsibility after the lands was transferred to NHC. Because in many cases, lands are transferred from the Ministry of Housing to the National Housing Corporation, two different legal entities. And then the board at National Housing Corporation usually meet and decide on what model they're going to use in terms of after the land is transferred, is the state going to take the responsibility, or is the private sector going to take the responsibility? I would hope that, as the leader of the opposition said, and this is no discussion that existed prior to me coming in here, or even when it was in here with the leader of the opposition, I talk truth. I would hope that I see a program where small black contractors who went to the vocational training board and who went to the polytechnic will be given an opportunity to see the benefits of the training which they have had, rather than going cap in hand begging for a job among the big contractors. I would like these men to even reach a stage where they are not only seen as artisans, but also entrepreneurs within the business market itself in Barbados. I would like to see that. So it is not exactly like the leader of the opposition said, though I believe that that consideration has to be put on the table for deep, serious discussion, because there was a time when there was some bogus view that we can construct buildings for commercial purposes at NHC, and there was also another view that we can build middle-class homes or middle-income homes, which one, middle-income homes for middle-class people is almost synonymous with saying that you're going to build middle-income houses itself. And that the profit margin, which was an idea that was so far-fetched that I could not believe what I was hearing from the person who was speaking to me at the time. We will get profit from middle-class homes that we sell in order to boost a working-class housing program. It was the most confused, naughty theory that I've ever heard. So I would love to see that we get back to a stage where we build middle-class homes. Now, working-class homes for our people, and not by the Chinese. If we have to get Chinese money, and we have to conform to the things that Chinese do, something going wrong. We are going off track. There's too much evidence. Too much evidence in Barbados of Chinese ripping off the state, and as a consequence, producing inferior housing for working class people. I don't want to give you the empirical evidence to support it, because I become the most sinister individual when I speak truth on these issues. And I would not say it because I don't want the truth to overshadow the importance of the point that I want to make. I am not one of those people who would point my hands at the minister either, because I am not that foolish. I know what I have seen. I know what I have seen, and I know what I know. And I know I paid prices for many of the things that I know are true. And I found myself here on what is called the backbench, some derogatory term for the description of legitimate persons who the people sent to Parliament in this country. I have also been threatened, madam, on many different economic and social issues, on the premature nature of my political survival, because I spoke the truth on these issues. A minister of housing, I confess you are my friend. I am also restrained because of the loyalty of that friendship. But I also know that, and I always urge you, when you are doing things that you know are correct, do not be restrained or constrained by being institutionalized. Because ultimately, you will pay the price. Some people will survive. There'll be a greater duration period of life in this parliament by the institution than you as an individual would receive. I've seen Elby Buffett walk the street. I have seen Joe Edgell. I have seen Lionel Cry, ministers of housing. I've seen them all. I have seen them in a state of mind after wearing suits here. I've seen them in a physical shape where they hardly had a good shirt on. So I just tell you that, and I hope you will try to create a mental construct that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. That the Ministry of Housing and the administrative staff of the Ministry of Housing and the RDC, I don't know when the RUDC ought to make contact with. There's no institution in this country that has more outside the commercial, and I'm not even sure if that body is not a commercial entity too. Outside the commercial entities that own enough space at Coverley, there's no institution that owns more land in this country than the Church of England. Through the Cosentran Trust. They have land that goes back to the 17th century, that stretches from the back of that building on the eastern side. And if you keep looking over and over, you will believe that that piece of land touched the borders of Cairo in Egypt. Poor people in this country need land. That is what I really came here to say. The other parts of it is icing, cosmetics of the discussion. The Church of England, who continue to retreat from the reparation program and sincere discussions, own thousands of acres of land across St. John and St. George, Drax too, and some of the royal affiliates too, that the lands are not used for any agricultural purposes. But governments are not as muscular as they ought to be in asserting themselves and not using a compulsory acquisition for stolen lands. We don't want no compulsory. Look, this is a moral issue. It's also a sensible issue in terms of equity and good governance. A few years ago, and recently too, I just said it by the way, this form of subterfuge that occurred. But a few years ago, we approached that Coddington Trust in St. John to work with us on a poverty alleviation program. In terms of even subdividing parts of that land, although it's in the trust, I heard, subdividing parts of that land so that poor black people in distress would have access to the utilization of the land at Coddington College. The demand for housing is very, very severe. Every morning in this country. As I say, this is just one strand of the problems of the marginalized people in this country. And I say there are persons who will need that land for respite care. They will need that land for just because they got large families, they have some money, and they will love land to do things. The church up there, Coddington College, the first institution of tertiary education in Barbados, owes a debt to the poor people of this country. And if they are as benevolent as they state they are, how can you have so much reports from so much international agencies year in and year out talking about the state of poverty and homeless people, and it does not touch the conscience of the Church of England? Let us take the cowboy horn, approach them, ask them to make a collaborative effort in a partnership between the NHC, the UDC, or the RDC, which, but I can't remember the new configurations, right? RUDC. Let us approach them and see what they can do. Let us hear, look, we're discussing these old structures about whether they're leasing land, selling land, whether we're using the compulsory acquisition. You stole the land. At least you have a social and moral responsibility to give back some of the land until final negotiations. It will come. You can hide for many years. The concept of reparation stands. But just like you did in recent times, refuse to give the $18 million or pounds that you said you were going to give to the state to help with the development of the same estate. You said you must manage the estate yourselves. After you commit crime, the criminals now want to manage the money that they owe to the victims. Tell me which law court you ever see with a model like that. You do something that is wrong, I say so. International bodies indicate that slavery is a crime against humanity. They say that they must manage it. They must hold the funds. But I ask, but in case any of these lands are defective, patent or latent, but we can identify them, would you be prepared to give an alternative piece of land for a house spot? The answer was no. This government in this post-Republican period must take radical stands in order to transform this country at the level which the people expect from any government that reached the level of being the holding Republican status. Or not, we'll be back to 1966, an incomplete mission. We owe it. We're going to give the people parliamentary reform, constitutional reform. We must have a holistic developmental approach to how this happens. The burden must not always fall back on the taxpayers of this country to provide money to purchase lands that were stolen from the people, both indigenous and African people. The land is not theirs. It's the colonized process that helped them to be in possession, not ownership of the land. So while I understand the rationale for the land being transferred to NHC and ultimately to people who are deserving of it, there is a macro issue that has to be discussed. It has to be discussed, and politicians must not be devoid of testicles. It has to be done. Minister, when you're going to do it when you're going to, in fact, I'm not going to tell you to do it, because I don't know if you might be doing it, and then it might be said that you're doing things because your ignorant friend from St. Michael's, he suggests that you do it. And then you don't know who else is going to be there for you. Or you receive a lot of lashes that you don't deserve. But if I say that, or I speak the truth, they believe that you tell me to say so for you. Tell you how this thing works in here, man. But your name will be etched, not only in the annals of history in this parliament, but as a man of revolutionary spirit, a man of courage, a man of vision that was responsible for the transformation of all that is happening in this country. Honourable member from St. James, I'm not going to make reference to you. Expectations are great in the general public, and I want to take this opportunity to insert this important point that I'm extremely happy to see a man of a progressive mind being added to the environment within the parliament of this country. And I hope that you do not breach your commitment to the people of Barbados because you want friendships. The problem in here is that you want to say something. This is not in your case, my friend from St. George. But sometimes you want to say something because you feel the debate ought to be open and objective. I don't dislike no specific person on earth, none. Although it is so to the general public, I don't like certain people of this pigmentation, of this origin. I would be a liar if I don't tell you that I have family that as a result of the intercourse, the miscegenation that exists between man and woman, we produce offsprings of all different types. I tell you where I stand in relation to supporting my people and unapologetically.
I remember you have 3 minutes, please.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, it's probably a good time for you to intervene because I really want to turn to the houses in Haggett Hall, you know.
Please get to them in the 3 minutes.
Yes. And I'm glad that you, on this occasion, is prepared to embrace me. Look, those houses in Haggett Hall, the defects that we were witnessing in Haggett Hall is not the fault of the state at the level of the Ministry of Housing. No way. No way. I got up out my bed 3 o'clock in the morning. The minister was there. He got up out his bed as well, because I received a call saying that the house is implored. And I rushed up there, believing that I was witnessing another Britain's Crossroad implosion of the units there. And when I got there, the water from upstairs soaked down the entire ceiling. Another night, a ceiling fell down and struck a woman in her head, different units. On 2 or so occasions, people were in the houses getting ready to go to work early in the morning and could not get out of the house because the lock stopped. It is the work that was done by the Chinese construction companies. And I hope that these companies don't ask for any additional finance from the government. The government has no money. The government is the execution officers in these circumstances of the people of Barbados. Money, taxpayers' money. And what the Chinese were paid before, furthermore, than giving them any additional money, they ought to be able to give a major rebate for the kind of work that that's being done. These people are doing this thing all over the world. I'm not saying that Americans or any other person are any better, but we have to state to them that this is a 166 square mile country, because we didn't get a chance to build the peninsulas or the 2 or 3 islands that we promised. We didn't get a chance to do it, but we're still 166 square miles, and hopefully up at Shark Hole, hopefully the landlord can do the break off up there. The adult Pelican, and we start to break off some up there too. And hopefully we don't have to face these things. But up to now, we still accept the measurement of 166 square miles.
Honourable member, please wrap up. You have expedited.
Thank you very much.
We've got a couple of members who wish to speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I always appreciate, ma'am, your rulings and your governing of these chambers. So I want to suggest that the Honourable Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister that is here take into consideration the manner in which the fluids in my brain flowed, and I've been able to deliver aspects of my concerns to you. And I hope that you will take these things into consideration so that we can build a better Barbados and do not allow these people to escape judgment, especially when it comes to selling land that don't belong to them in the first place. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:45 p.m., please.
Our members, the question is that this Honourable Chamber be suspended until 2:45 p.m. 2:45 p.m. 2:45 p.m. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This Honourable Chamber is suspended until 2:45 p.m.